Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're new here, well, welcome in. Pull up a chair. The kettle is on. This is the Gilded Leaf, a space for tea, soul work reflections, and plant wisdom for the quiet conversations that live beneath the surface. Wherever you're listening from, I invite you to settle in. Take a breath, because that's what we do here. I invite you to put in your earbuds or your headphones and join me for a few moments of gentle reflection. I hope you have a warm cup of tea. I know I do. Hi, I'm Bridget, the writer and voice behind the Gilded Leaf. And if we're sitting together right now, this is the part where I slide you a warm cup of tea across the table. Of course, taking a breath and say, okay, y'all, here's my truth. For those that don't know me, I'm a leaf lover, a tea drinker. Honestly, I drink tea all day, every day, all year long. And with that, well, you guys know, tea has always been the one constant comfort in my life, the one thing that shows up no matter what season I'm moving through. It steadies me. It's a hug in each cup all day long, and I love it. It really regulates my emotional landscape depending on what herb is in my cup. I encourage you to do the same. The Gilded Leaf was born out of a daily ritual of boiling water, steeping leaves, and pausing long enough to notice myself. That's where the good stuff lives. The milk and honey of the Gilded Leaf. A passion project and something I could offer into my little corner of the world to build community, to share herbal education, and to honor the beauty of plants and the gentle ways that they help us heal. So I want to get into the path so far. It's going to be a warm recap of all four chakras with their paired herbs and what imbalance looks like in each spoken, like a story, not like a syllabus. So we're in the middle of our chakra series right now, traveling gently up the body, one energy center at a time, with a plant ally steeping beside us at each stop along the way. So before we arrive fully at the throat, I want to walk us back along the path we've already traveled together, because the throat doesn't exist in isolation. It is carrying the stories of every chakra beneath it, the healed ones and or the tender ones alike. And I want to do something a little bit different this time in this recap. I want to name not just what each chakra offers us when it's nourished, but also what it looks like when it's out of balance. Because for me, recognizing ourselves in the shadow is often where the real healing begins, from my experience in any case. So, we began at the very foundation in episode 1, which was the root chakra. A place at the base of our body where the first questions of our lives get answered, such as, am I safe? Do I belong? Is the ground beneath my feet? Or am I unsteady? The herbs that went along with episode 1 was ashwagandha, that deep, earthy root aptogen, along with burdock root, nettle, and of course a touch of ginger. All grounding plants, anchoring plants, herbs that speak directly to the nervous system and say, you are allowed to settle. The emergency is over. You can put something down, right? The root chakra, when nourished, teaches the body how to stay. But when the root is out of balance, when it has never quite learned that the ground is safe, it shows up as fear, as chronic anxiety, as hypervigilance. The body that cannot rest even when nothing is wrong, that fight or flight, running quietly underneath everything all the time. The feeling that the earth might shift beneath you at any moment. So you had better stay braced, stay ready, stay small enough to survive whatever is coming. Many of us are still working on this one, myself included, still slowly and gently teaching our nervous system that it is safe to land, which is a big one due to perhaps my adoption or surviving a divorce at a young age. Well, life be life in. Episode 2, we go from the root to the sacral, or the second chakra, which is just below the navel, the center of feeling pleasure and creativity and fluid emotion, the place where the body remembers it is allowed to want things, allowed to feel things, allowed to move like water instead of like stone. We steeped Damiana, love her, and rose, hibiscus, and cinnamon, and orange peel. All are warm, sensual, creative plants that encourage the body to soften around sensations and desires. The sacral chakra, when nourished, teaches the body how to flow. But when the sacral is out of balance, it surfaces as guilt. The feeling that wanting is wrong, that pleasure is indulgent, that your emotions are too much or too inconvenient, too messy to be allowed. Guilt lives here, the quiet voice that says you shouldn't feel that way that you feel, or that your desires are shameful, that the parts of you that want and ache and long should be kept hidden or apologized for. The sacral asks us to practice the radical act of feeling without judgment or allowing the river to move, which then brings us slowly up to the solar plexus, right? In episode 3, that bright burning center just above the navel, the place of personal power, self-worth, and identity, where the nervous system learns the difference between force and true, steady power. The herbs we worked with in this episode is hawthorn. We talked about blossoms with thorns alongside dandelion root, turmeric, and lemon balm, herbs of brightness and digestive strength, because digestion is not just about food. It's about how we process experience, right? The solar plexus, when nourished, teaches the body how to transform. But when the solar plexus is out of balance, what we feel most is shame. Shame is deeper than guilt. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame, however, says, I am something wrong. It lives in the solar plexus as a collapse, a shrinking of the fire, a dimming of the I am. It shows up as chronic self doubt, the inability to make decisions, or giving your power away to others because some part of you believes they know better, that you don't deserve to take up space, that your fire is dangerous rather than sacred. Boy, do I know this chakra center well. I have struggled with this for many of my formative years. The solar plexus asks us to tend that fire with patience, to let it burn steadily rather than blazing and crashing. And with that, we then come to the heart in episode 4, a beautiful episode, and I encourage you to go back and listen to it. It's the bridge between the lower body and the upper, the place where earth meets sky, where the personal meets the universal, where we learn to love not as performance, not as self erasure, but as a living, breathing, sometimes grieving practice that includes ourselves. The herbs that we steeped in this episode, I think there was 2. Hawthorn, again, the great herb of Western herbalism, alongside with rose, 2 plants that have been tending broken and blooming hearts for centuries. The heart chakra, when nourished, teaches the body how to love. But when out of balance, what moves through is grief. Boy, this is a big one as well. Grief is not only the grief of loss, though it's that too. It's also the grief of connection withheld, of love that was conditional, of the times you were open and were not met. The heart out of balance closes. It armors. It either loves so much it loses itself, or it withdraws so far it forgets how to be moved. Both are grief wearing different clothing. The heart asks us to stay open even when openness has cost us something, to keep loving. Here's the trick. To keep loving ourselves first, then outward as an act of courage. Okay. So we have traveled through fear, guilt, shame, and grief, through the body's great teachers, though the body's great teachers and its tenderest wounds. And now we arrive at the throat. And if you look at that map, fear, guilt, shame, grief, you begin to understand why the throat chakra often goes quiet. I have struggled with this energetic center for a very, very long time. And I'll share something personal with y'all later. But because when you're afraid, you don't speak. When you feel guilty for wanting, you don't ask. When you are ashamed of who you are, you perform instead of express. And when your heart is grieving, sometimes there are simply no words left. The throat doesn't close on its own, it closes to protect everything beneath us, right? And when the throat itself goes out of balance, the shadow that emerges is dishonesty. Not always outright lying, though sometimes that too, More often, it is the quiet daily untruth, the yes when you meant no, the fine when you're not fine, the performance of agreement when everything inside of you is disagreeing, the self betrayal that accumulates slowly until you can no longer quite remember what your own truth sounds like. The throat asks us to practice the most vulnerable thing of all, to say what is actually our truth, even when there's fear involved, even when it costs something, even when we are still learning what our truth is. And now, with all of that held gently, let's steep something together and begin. So, we're going to get into today's steeping. And I want to focus on peppermint. However, there are a lot of throat allies that I want to mention. Not a specific blend per se, but a lot of throat allies for different throat syndromes and symptoms. So, if you can, put the kettle on and let the sound of the water be part of this moment. So, like I said, today I'm reaching for peppermint. That is in my cup today and yesterday and all last week because I had a lot of things in my brain that I needed clarity for, and this podcast is one of them, which we'll talk through together in just a moment around the different throat blends. But know that all of these herbs are cooling and bright and clarifying. Imagine that first sip, aromatic, almost shimmering, like a small open window in a stuffy room, is kind of my visual. Let the steam rise up towards your face. Let you breathe it in. Notice how your throat, how your jaw, how your chest feel right now. You don't have to fix anything. That's what the Gilded Leaf is all about. We're not fixing anything, we're just noticing, right? And so let's talk about peppermint. Peppermint is probably already in your cabinet. It's probably been in your life longer than you realize. In a tea someone made for you when you were feeling unwell, or in a steam from a bowl you leaned over when your chest felt tight, when your mama would care for you when you were a kid, or that first cool exhale that cleared something you didn't even know was stuck. Most of us reach for peppermint and think, fresh breath. I know I do. Easy digestion, something familiar, something like that, right? We rarely think to reach for peppermint when we need a clear mind or an open throat or a steadiness to finally say the thing that we've been holding. But peppermint has always been there for exactly that. Peppermint is a nervine. And when I say nervine, it speaks directly towards your nervous system. Where chamomile, our beloved herb from the Welcome episode, she whispers rest. Peppermint says something different. Peppermint says, wake up. Not in the way the world wakes you with urgency and noise and everything undone. Peppermint wakes you the way a window does when someone finally opens it after a long, still afternoon. That rush of cool, clean air, that sudden sense that your lungs are bigger than you remembered. Peppermint is my quote unquote before I speak in my cup kind of herb that I reach for when I know the words are coming and I want to meet them with a clear head and an open throat. Peppermint doesn't force the voice open. Peppermint simply clears the channel so the truth doesn't have to fight its way out. for the days when my voice, or maybe your voice, has been working so hard, when something real is on its way out of the inside of you, or the whole system feels tender. These ally herbs are all so great to work with when you're working with your throat chakra. Um, when you are feeling sick and your throat is tender and raw and feels on fire, I reach for marshmallow root, right? Silky, generous, rich in plant mucilage that becomes almost milky when mixed with water. When the throat is raw from overuse, from speaking all day, or from crying, or from holding back tears, marshmallow root lines the path and says, "Let me make this easier for you." Energetically, marshmallow root is the herb of gentle passage and protection, is how I work with marshmallow root. Another throat ally is a big one in TCM called licorice root. It's sweet, it's damp, it's harmonizing, and licorice root brings moisture to dry, taxed lung tissues and is one of the most widely herbs used in TCM. It's a peacemaker in a blend, balancing, binding, softening the hard edges of what needs to be said. Another throat ally that I like to work with is thyme. Thyme is aromatic, clearing, alive, the kind of plant that feels like fresh air moving through the room that has been closed too long. I know in old folk traditions, thyme was given to those who needed bravery before a difficult task. Thyme carries courage in its leaves. I can't make this stuff up, you guys. And then I love ginger in a lot of blends. Why? Because ginger is warming and circulating. Ginger reminds the body that it is still capable of moving what is stuck, emotionally, physically, energetically, whatever. A kind of gentle fire under everything. Ginger activates and ignites and supports the solar plexus as it feeds the throat fire. Elderberry is another throat ally that I love, love, love. And when I was meditating on the herbs that I would talk about in this episode, elderberry came as an image of standing quietly at the door like a guardian. It's protective, immune supportive. It's kind of like that wise herb, one of the great threshold herbs, I call it, present at beginnings and endings, at the moments when something old is leaving and something new is trying to find its voice. We then have slippery elm, which is I feel like it's kind of like marshmallow root. It holds hands with marshmallow root very nicely. It's soothing, it's coating, it's a deeply protective herb. And so, together with marshmallow root, these two are the great comforters of any throat work. Energetically, slippery elm creates safety, like a lined passage where the words do not have to scrape on its way out, right? And then just an honorable mention of chamomile, right, to close the circle. Chamomile is relaxing and cooling, inviting the whole system to kind of unclench just a little bit, right? So that's why I'm throwing it in these throat ally herbs. But don't forget a spoon of raw honey to finish, right? Because sometimes the medicine needs a little sweetness to go down all the way. So if you have any of these herbs nearby, Steep a cup now and let it sit while we talk. The waiting is part of the ritual. Patience is already part of the medicine. So let's talk about what the throat chakra really is. It's the energetic teaching, grounding in the body, your voice throughout, right? The throat chakra, Vishuddha in Sanskrit, which translates as purification, lives in the tender hollow at the base of your neck where your breath gathers itself and decides to become sound, right? It's often called the center of communication, but that doesn't quite capture its depth. And for me, the throat chakra is the meeting place between your inner world and the outer life, right? It's so beautiful when you think of it that way. The bridge where unspoken feelings, thoughts, and truths get the chance to cross over into words, into boundaries, into the way you introduce yourself and the way perhaps you say no. When this space is nourished, expression feels like a gentle river, right? It ebbs, it flows. Your words don't have to be perfect to be honest. You can say, I don't know, or I'm not ready, or this is what I need without collapsing into shame afterwards. You feel like your voice actually belongs in the room when it is nourished. However, when the throat chakra is strained or closed, it can feel like a lump or a goiter that won't quite clear, right? A tense jaw, a tongue that suddenly forgets what it wants to say. Maybe you swallow your words, or maybe you say yes when your whole body means no. Maybe you talk and still feel unseen because you're speaking from performance instead of from your rooted truth. Let me take a slow sip here. I encourage you to do the same. Let the warmth slide down the back of your throat. Imagine soft, luminous blue light like an early morning sky or the early morning sunset gathering gently around your throat, loosening old stories that say you're too loud or you're too much or you're too quiet or you don't articulate enough, whatever. Let those old stories loosen because, well, let me share a personal story, right? I want to share something because I can't talk about the throat chakra without talking about where I learned to lose my voice and the long, slow work of finding it again, I grew up in a house of writers. Words were currency. Both of my parents are gifted, articulate people who could move language across the page with a kind of ease that I found both beautiful and quite intimidating. Right? Words in my home lived on paper. They were crafted, they were considered, they were controlled. In a room face to face, it was a different story. I'm the youngest, and in that position, I learned early that the conversation was usually already happening by the time I arrived to it. My sibling is older, chattier, more certain of their right to be heard, and I learned to be small and watchful and full of things I couldn't quite find the words for yet, so I learned to wait. And then to wait a little longer. And then, often, to not even bother. Sometimes when I did speak, it rarely came out the way that it lived inside me. The thought was clear in my chest, bright, whole, and certain. But somewhere between my heart and my mouth got all mangled and tangled. The words came out wrong, too fast, or in the wrong order, or not at all. It's when I started to realize that I might be neurodivergent. And in a house where language was that kind of currency, that felt like a particularly poor kind of poverty. So I learned other languages instead. I learned to read the room, to anticipate what was wanted. I sometimes was agreeable, but most of the times, especially in my teen years, I got more attention by not being agreeable. So rather than honestly speaking to what I needed, I would shrink or shut down as so not to be ashamed. And I mistook adaptation for communication. And for a long time, I didn't know the difference. I carried into my adult life um, a lot of these ways that I'm still, even now, gently untangling, right? In relationships, in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, I often felt unheard, not because people weren't listening, but because I wasn't fully speaking my truth. I would say a version of the truth, a softened version, an edited version, and then feel frustrated when it didn't land the way that I needed it to. I would repeat myself, trying different words, different angles, different tones, hoping that this time it would finally register. And honestly, the exhausting irony of a blocked throat chakra, you can talk constantly and still feel completely invisible. So, through my 20s, 30s, 40s, I became at different points in my life the over explainer, the one who rehearsed conversations in the car and then delivered a completely different, safer version in the room or to whomever I was talking to, the one who went silent, the one who withdrew, not from peace but from protection. If I didn't speak, I couldn't be misunderstood. If I didn't ask for what I needed, I couldn't be told no. Right? Logical? Does that make sense? What I didn't understand then and what I understand now, having done pretty substantial work on the lower chakras, is that the throat cannot fully open until what lives beneath feels safe enough to be expressed. I think I've arrived, y'all, with a podcast. My root hadn't yet fully learned that it was safe to be here. My sacral was still managing feeling rather than allowing it. My solar plexus was still negotiating whether my truth had any right to take up space. And my heart was still learning that love didn't require self erasure. Of course, my throat was quiet. It was protecting everything beneath it. It wasn't until I began doing real substantial work on those lower centers, slowly and certainly not perfectly, but imperfectly, with a lot of tea and more than a few difficult conversations, that I noticed something shift. Right? So I noticed that the defensiveness started to soften, the counter arguing quieted, the need to repeat myself in relationships, that desperate energy to please just hear me, began to ease. And I shifted, and my relationships either ended because I was overperforming in the relationships, or I was setting more clear boundaries. Not because the world around me changed, but because I stopped needing the outside world to confirm what I was already beginning to know inside of myself. I started saying simply, "This is real for me." That is the work of the throat chakra. Not volume, not eloquence, not getting it perfect. Just the quiet, courageous practice of letting what is true inside of you find its way outside. But we can't talk about voice without talking about my favorite subject, the nervous system. When the body feels unsafe, your throat often goes on lockdown first. You might freeze, go blank, or default to people pleasing because your system is just trying to keep you safe. And it's not failure, it's biology. Your voice is not broken, it's protecting you the way it's learned to. So instead of judging yourself for all the times you didn't speak up, myself included, I want you to think of your throat as a loyal guardian who has been working overtime. That's how I love the image to be for my own self-soothing. The invitation now is to slowly, gently show that guardian it is safer here than it used to be. It might look like speaking slower, taking a breath before you answer, or letting silence exist in a conversation without rushing to fill it. It might mean noticing when your shoulders rise to your ears when you talk about something hard to someone, and gently, without judgment, letting them drop. Your voice doesn't live in your mouth alone, it lives in your entire body. So let me share with you 3 or 4 different things on how to give your voice its voice. So one of the things that when I was working with my throat chakra, I call these the morning murmurs. So maybe tomorrow, I encourage you, tomorrow morning before you reach for your cell phone, pour yourself a cup of tea and give yourself one small moment of sound, right? I do this by a hum or a sigh, a whisper to myself, good morning, or simply naming how I'm really feeling in the morning, like I'm hopeful today, or I'm tired, or I'm overwhelmed. Let it be simple, even clumsy. This isn't performance, it's about presence with your voice as sound. The other thing that I like to do around working with the throat chakra is what I call my truth on paper. And so I encourage you sometime this week to sit with a notebook and write one uncensored page of truth. No editing. Don't worry, this isn't about grammar or tone. And when you're done, keep it or fold it into your journal or tear it up if that feels safe or safer. The point is not the page, it's about the practice of allowing your inner language to move outside of you somewhere private and safe. The third thing is I call the boundary steep, right? So before your next cup of whatever throat ally you choose, or just peppermint tea, quietly name one boundary you're honoring today. Maybe it's like, I'm allowing to say no to last minute plans, or I'm not over explaining myself today. Let that boundary steep in your cup alongside with the herbs, and then with the cup in your hand, infusing each sip with a little more clarity and self-trust. Another thing that I do when I'm working with my throat chakra that has worked for me, hopefully it will work for you, is kind of what I call the soft sound practice, right? I encourage you once or twice this week. I always kind of have it in the forefront of my rituals is try making simple, gentle sounds when you're alone, like humming in the shower. My favorite thing is singing softly with a song that I love in the shower. Um, or reading a paragraph out loud to yourself in a slow, kind voice. This is not about being a good singer in the shower. It's about reminding your throat what it feels like to carry sound without judgment. And if you're able and have a cup, bring it a little closer now. I love this ritual moment of tea and voice. Feel the warmth of the mug in your hands. Notice where your fingers land on the handle or how the heat loosens the small tensions in your grip. Take an exhale through the nose, letting the aroma rise. It's cool and minty, maybe just a little floral. Imagine the scent traveling up behind your nose, down the back of your throat, into your upper chest. On your exhale, soften your jaw just a fraction. Let your tongue rest a little heavier in your mouth. Silently or out loud, if it feels safe, you might say things like, I am allowed to take up space with my voice. Or, I don't have to rush my words, or my truth matters even when there's fear there. Let those words be like herbs themselves, right? Subtle, slowly absorbed, working beneath the surface. Nothing to force. That's the gilded leaf. Nothing to perform. Just this moment. You, me, your cup, your breath, and the quiet possibility of a more honest voice. So, before we part for today, I want to thank you. Ashe. Thank you for being here, for listening, for showing up and making space for the quiet things that move the heart and warm the soul. I hope that this feels more like a shared moment and less like a podcast, like sitting with an old friend and with a warm cup of tea where nothing needs to be fixed and nothing needs to be rushed. Just a time for you and me to sit together as old friends and tend to what lives deep within us. If this episode kept you company or softened something inside you, I'd love for you to stay close. Subscribe to The Gilded Leaf wherever you listen so you don't miss the next steeping in our chakra series, because I feel like it's important. And if you found me on Substack, part of subscribing will get you the weekly steep. It's a love letter to herbs, which arrives sometime in the week, every week. A short devotional letter centered around one herb with herbal notes, gentle prompts, and a simple invitation to bring that plant into your own kitchen ritual. A moment to look forward to each week, to sit, to pause, to take time for yourself. If you feel called to share this episode with someone who might be tending to their own throat chakra right now, someone who is learning slowly and bravely to trust the sound of their own voice, that is how community grows, right? I feel like one warm cup at a time. if this conversation stayed with you, lingered like a gentle, sweet aftertaste. I'm grateful, because that's the milk and honey of the gilded leaf, creating space to pause, to listen inward, and to remember ourselves. So, as always, this is Bridget and the Gilded Leaf signing off, steeped in truth and offered with care.